Welcome to the Youth Voice, a podcast giving young people a voice in politics across the end of Ireland. So today we're joined by the leader of the Progressive Unionist Party and Belfast City Councillor Billy Hutchinson. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dermot.
So I suppose we'll get straight in. The big thing in the moment is the protocol. All anybody can talk about is the protocol. So there's now talks from Jeffrey Donaldson, who appears to be the new leader of the DUP, that if he comes over, if he becomes First Minister, he's going to turn down the Assembly. Is that the right course of action? Is that really what Jeffrey should be doing, or do you think there's a better approach?
Well, I think it's whether Jeffrey's going to give leadership or where he's going to try to make popular decisions is another issue. I think that there's a number of things around that, but so first of all, what I would say is that the protocols have been a mess in terms of, as we seen yesterday, there were the fishermen and were protesting in Dublin about the quotas and stuff like that. So, and they're blaming that on the protocols. But I think that what we need to remember is that the protocols is a deal, and it's a trade deal with between the EU and the UK to leave. So therefore, it just doesn't have effect in Northern Ireland. It has an effect across the rest of the UK. The difference I think that we need to be looking at and what we need to be concerned about, because people are talking about protocols affecting our Britishness and all the rest of it. And I think that, what people need to be careful of is that Theresa May offered a deal and the DUP turned it down. And that deal was that the whole of the UK would stay in the single market. And if you remember, it was called a backstop. But it was turned down. And in hindsight, when you look at that deal compared to the one we've got now, is where Northern Ireland is left in the single market and no other region of the UK. So it causes problems. I think people who are the people's concerns around the protocols is about how they came about. It's not about how they were negotiated or about how they came about. It was about moving a border that existed for 100 years in Cllr, which we would call in Uri, but I think the proper name is Cllr, because it's outside Uri. And I think that's the problem, because I think it was seen that the Dublin government, along with other nationalists and Republicans, were arguing that there could be violence, and if anybody put a structure there, then there would be IRA violence against any customs. And I think that was the wrong thing to do or say. If there was an argument to move the border on the basis that the border shouldn't be there because of trade, then that should have been the argument to be made. But it now looks like to many loyalists and many unionists, it was a decision about made on the basis of a threat of violence. And the issue, Dermot, is that most unionists, the majority of unionists, would support the rule of law. And I think that is the difficulty in terms of how that came about. So I don't think it's just as easy. I think in terms of my view about this, Article 16 and pulling down the Assembly are the same thing to me. Because what you do is you hand back the power to the two sets of people who sit down and negotiate it in the first place. And if they negotiate it in the first place, why would they move it? Now, I have to say that Lord Frost, and I'm not a Tory, but Lord Frost seems to be getting it. He's come here and he's talked to people, he's heard from everybody, and he now recognises there's things that they can't do and they need to renegotiate that. But I think, that's their only hope of the protocols changing. But I do think in terms of being left in the single market, I think that my concern as being someone who's pro-British and what to remain British is that it would take 7 years for Brexit to happen. And our economy is going towards the EU rather than the UK. What's that going to look like in 7 years? If we're still part of the UK, that's great. But I would remind people it's a principle of consent at this stage, whether we're in the UK or not, and that means we have a vote. And I would remind people that whatever way you vote, whether you're pro-Irish or pro-British, the difficulty with that is that we leave behind a large minority, no matter whether it's pro-British or pro-Irish. So it's how we get around all of that. We need to realise that we do live in a divided society. I'm not saying that there's no violence, but there's very little violence. It depends how we describe violence. So it's how do we move forward in this country, and we can't have domination by Republicans, and we certainly can't have domination by Unionists. So it's about how do we get that, and this isn't about middle ground, but it is about understanding how we share that responsibility. And I think that's been lacking in the Assembly. It seems to me that the two largest parties have no confidence in each other. I'm not looking them to have anything else other than confidence, but if we don't have confidence in how to move forward, then I think we're stuck. And it's how do we solve that? So getting back to your question, will Sir Geoffrey pull it down on the basis which I've just mentioned, or does he think that it will resolve the issues? And I think it's the first one. It's not the latter, because he's an MP. He has been there for a while. He has been involved in negotiations and talks before, so I'm assuming that he knows this. But let's see what he does. I have a saying, and I said this to late David Irving. Obviously when he was alive, I said to him, that I thought the DUP and Sinn Féin would go into government, and he said to me, it won't happen. And he said to me, what do you base this on? I said, I base it on the fact that I never listen to what the DUP say. I always watch what they do. And I think that's part of politics as well, because politics is a lot about rhetoric, but the reality about politics is it's about the art of the possible. And I think the other thing I would say, and this is a very strange thing to say, but I'll explain it when I say it, nothing concentrates in mind like a hanging. So what I mean is, if you're a man who's condemned to death and you're going to get hung, you'll start to think about things you've never thought about before. So what I'm saying about Republicans and Unionists or Nationalists and Loyalists all need to think about when you're at that sort of stage and you think that you're standing on the gallows, then you'll have a different attitude and a different outlook. So what I'm hoping is that people will actually take a step back and they will do the right things. And I don't know what the right things are at the moment. I don't think anybody knows, but let's hope it's the right things at work.
Absolutely. And I want to draw on, I suppose, actually something you said there about rhetoric. It seems, and it was something I was talking about in a podcast a couple of days ago as well. It seems that there's a lot of talk about a border and, a hard border or soft border and, the change of the border. And there's a lot of talk of borders anyway. But I suppose there's a lot of people saying that the rhetoric of using a border when it comes to, the NI protocol is too much. It's kind of causing tension, because I suppose there isn't actually a physical border that you can see in between the UK and, NI, I suppose. So I suppose, is a lot of this down to the rhetoric and all of the tension around the NI protocol? Is it a lot down to the rhetoric that's come out and all of the talk that has come out of the protocol and all of the anger and from a lot of politicians?
Well, yeah, and I think this all started around Brexit. Now, whether you were a Brexiteer or why you were a Remainer doesn't matter any longer, because there was a vote and they decided to leave. So it's about how we close that leave down. And, so from my point of view, the difficulty with the whole notion about Brexit was that people told us what they thought was going to happen, but nobody ever mentioned, what about the border? If you leave the EU, what about the border between the UK and the EU? Because that border was a collision, because we're in the UK and we were in Europe, but we're out of it now. So that border is magnified 1,000 times. And we get all sorts of talks about the border. So you're right. I think it's not only rhetoric, but it's misunderstanding of what people thought that Brexit was going to bring. I think people feel that they were duped. I think people believe that there wasn't enough information about what Brexit would do. So you've got all of those problems, Dermot. And I think when you add all that together and you add the rhetoric, because there's certainly rhetoric out there, and I would be very cautious and say to people, be very careful with this rhetoric, because at the end of the day, if we have a political void, what will happen is it'll be filled with violence. And I say that on the basis of our history tells us that. And going back, not so far, but going back to the 70s, you just need to be careful. So from that point of view, I'm always worried about, because when I was a young lad, it was Paisley. I never supported Paisley. I suppose in many ways I didn't agree with what he was saying. because I knew that he wouldn't stand up to what he was saying. And all of this could be accused of being allegations, and probably is, because there's no evidence of it. But the point I'm making is that I met lots of young men in prison who actually would have blamed Paisley, but I didn't listen to them because I didn't think that if he really had wanted to be the leader, then what he should have done was became the leader of those people who were involved in violence as well. He should have politically represented them, which he didn't do. But anyway, we are where we are. But what I'm saying is, let's be careful with the rhetoric. Let's be careful. We need to tone some of this down. We need to realise that we do still have a political system, and if that political system works, then we should use it. For me, the protocols happen through a political system, and it needs to have a political solution. So it's how we get there. Now, my difficulty is that solution has to be solved between the British government and also the EU. And what I would hope for is, particularly Dublin and London, would sit down and have a talk about how to sort this out, because it definitely is affecting Dublin. I've been trying to find out how much it has affected Dublin in terms of the trade that they do with the UK, because it's a large amount of the trade. But what I get back is it doesn't matter how much we're losing, we make it with the other 26 countries. But I'm not so sure that you can make it with the other 26 countries, because it's a very narrow sort of trade. It's not like you can trade in everything. And then, of course, we have Apple and other people here in the Republic. And I always believe that these people only come here to get some sorts of tax incentives, corporation tax and all of that. And then some of them, Starbucks, don't pay it. But the point I'm making here is, we need to be very careful, because this is not just about our political system. It's about the economic system and how that works. And it's about, all of those people who have got sort of high levels of influence because of the amount of billions they have, compared to others, who don't have that influence. So it's very complicated. It's not simple. And I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but what I do know is what all the problems are. But we do need to find a solution. So it would be useful if we had Dublin and London sitting down and getting an agreement, and then trying to resolve the problems that exist with the border. And we now call it an IC border. I don't know why, because it's not in the IC. It's actually in Scotland. It's in Liverpool. It's in Kent. It's in all the places in ports. It's also in Wales. I forgot, because Holyhead, is it? I think it is. Yeah, Holyhead. They go till Dublin and other ports. So I mean, you've got all of that, and I think so it's how you sort all of that out. And the last thing I'll say on that is, the problem with the EU is they're very bureaucratic. And I don't know why you've heard the argument, but you'll have heard the argument that sausage is coming in from the UK. It's really ridiculous. But I see them as being bureaucratic. And when I mean bureaucratic, what I mean is that they have these tight rules, and I understand those tight rules. Those tight rules is that they don't get the wrong type of food into the EU, but it goes overboard. So, I can hear them sitting in meetings going, BF15 can't be allowed, it's probably a sausage. And 24D isn't allowed either, and that's probably some sort of transport of goods. So we need to remember that the protocols are around the transport of goods and not transfers of people. But some of the veterinary stuff that is happening, like pot noodles for B&M, has to go to Lauren to be checked by the veterinary people, which just gets ridiculous. But, we certainly need it sorted out, but we needed to sort it out to the benefit of the UK and the EU.
Absolutely. I suppose just moving on from the protocol as well, I want to talk about class politics, because I suppose that's something your party had always been big on. I just wanted to, I suppose, talk to you about how it seems like kind of very working class, kind of a move away from big house unionism never really seemed to take off in mainstream politics. And, I was just wondering, do you think you really know why, or is it just down to kind of...
There's no doubt about it. Why? Because I am very conscious that why is the simple reason that there's always been a threat. And that threat of politics is about whether one is the largest party or the other is the largest party, and it's used during elections. It even gets to a stage where we have STV, which is about sharing the vote, and it isn't shared. It's kept between the two largest parties, and they don't really share votes with others. And so therefore, that keeps it out. Now, we do have we've had a bit of a change in the last couple of elections, because we've got the Greens, who I would see more as environmental rather than as working class. But I mean, when you look at environmental, it just doesn't stop there, because if you look at something like fuel poverty, so in my own area, there will be people who have to choose between eating and heating, and if they heat the house, they can't eat, and if they eat, they can't heat. So that's poverty, and everybody describes it as fuel poverty and food poverty. For me, it's poverty, and it's about how you get around that. So I know that people before profit and things are there now, but they're not seen. They're seen more like they're challenging Sinn Féin on Sinn Féin's sort of policies and stuff like that. But the reality is, I think it was a fear factor. I would have said to you back in between 94 and 98 that within 10 years that we would have had parties that were totally together and fighting those social issues. But it was never allowed to happen. And I think that I always believe that there's always something was on in the background, very Machiavellian, particularly in unionism. And whenever you get people like David Irving and Gary McMichael and coming out and being very articulate and making sense, you then end up with some guy shaving head, tattoos, and an Alsatian dog with a Union Jack on it, and the media pay attention to him. Turns out he's a drug dealer, but they still do it. And for me, the media's attention and him appearing, whenever unionism is actually doing something quite good, and then it looks like unionism is grasping defeat from the jaws of victory around the whole agreement thing, and that's what happens. But maybe I'm just a conspiracy theorist, but I don't believe I am. But it's that sort of stuff. So I think that there's people there who want to not enable it to happen, and I don't know who it is. But I do suspect that they're connected to government in some way, or security services, whoever. But you always seem to have this group in the background that can always bring something out. We don't know who that group is. They don't even know why the group exists, but somebody actually manipulates it. So, I think that there's a lot of things that needs to be done. I look at Mashenko, and we're a community that lost 50,000 people back in the 60s. They went to outlying areas like sort of Antrim, Bangor, Newton Ards, Craigavon, Carrickfergus, all of those places on the cusp of a war recession. The people with all the skills moved because that's where they were creating jobs, and they created new places. And what we ended up with was that those companies just left, and they looked for green labor elsewhere, and they left those people who were sort of like with the low skills. They left them behind. And we've created a number of ghettos in those areas, and we've left the Schenkel derelict. We've taken the sort of all those skills away and things like that. So from that point of view, what we've been working on is an aging population. From late 60s. The planning in terms of roads and housing. And it took local people to actually fed it using the Save the Schenkel campaign. So you've got that all over the place. So from my point of view, a lot of these things should have brought about some sort of unity between whatever you are, whether you're Irish, British, or whatever. But we should have had a party that's on the left, or at least left to centre. And no matter how much you try, people don't listen to you. And they continually vote for the big boys, thinking that the big boys are the people who will lead us out of it. If they're waiting on the big boys to lead us out of it this time, the ones who wear suits and carry suitcases about, or suitcases, carry briefcases about, it's not going to happen. It's never happened before in our lifetime. It's not going to change now.
And I suppose one last thing about on that class politics is, as we've seen the rise of the likes of PBP. At one point we saw Eamon McCann in Derry, and we also saw, Jerry Carroll. We see Jerry Carroll in West Belfast, and you have You have the Greens who have been fairly good on economic policies and that kind of thing. Do you think we are starting to see a shift towards, I suppose, more class politics and less, I suppose, sectarian politics, or are we still kind of going to be stuck and entrenched in that, I suppose, the big two or the big four, what looks like the big five now, but still not really a massive move away from orange and green?
Well, I think that's a danger. We are stuck with a big five rather than being stuck with the politics that plays out, particularly in the UK or even in the Republic to an extent. But the difficulty with that is, what everybody's waiting on is that Sinn Féin gets the Taoiseach's job in the Republic. And here in Northern Ireland, they have the First Minister, which then meets their project, because they said from the very beginning, if they reach those lofty heights, then that would be United Ireland. Now, it's not United Ireland. It's, they've got power north and south. And the difficulty with that is it calls into question how can they take part in any talks about Northern Ireland, because they made the same complaint whenever we had the supply and demand, the supply thing that the DUP agreed with the Tories and said how could they be involved in talks, because they're really involved with the British government. So they can't. They have to apply the same rule to them. But no, I think for the time being, I think that your generation and the next generation and the generation after that will change things. But I think it will be generational change. I think it, in terms of what you say particularly about people for profit, I think that was, in my opinion, I think that was people who weren't happy with Sinn Féin. On the basis of why they elected them. Now, there'd be a lot of reasons for that. There may be some Republicans who were sort of just didn't agree with what was going on now in terms of politics. And then there may have been other people who were just Catholics, but maybe voted SDLP all their lives, had decided to move over to them. And that was a good shift. But the difficulty is that I don't know how long that will be sustained. Because if Sinn Féin are to grow, even more in terms of both North and South, then I think that people will then start to go back to Sinn Féin, and that will damage people for profit. But I would like to see us getting into the politics, because I live in a community that's totally depraved. I represent a community that's totally depraved, and I understand the problems, and so forth. If you take the last 50 years or 60 years, whether it's London or Belfast, the problem with that is it's the same families who are really mobile, and other people are being left behind, and that's because of the deprivation. So if you take somewhere like in my area, educational underachievement is very, very high, and it's generational now. It's not just this generation; it's generational. And the pandemic, highlighted that more, I think, and shone a torch on it, if the torch wasn't already being shown on it. So it's how we actually deal with those things. So for me, and I'm not asking you what your politics are, but I'm assuming if I wanted to appeal to you as a party, and we have these policies, it would be about, pro-choice in terms of women. It would be about LGBT plus, and it would be about education, and it would be about sort of making sure that everybody has the same equality and all the rest of it. All of those things are in our policies, but we still can't get people to actually vote for us in the numbers we need them to vote for. And people will go and vote for the alliance, and I get that for us, but still with all, there's probably not a cigarette paper between us and the alliance in terms of our policies. But anyway, that's where we're at. But yes, I would hope, Dermot, that politics changes in this country. It needs to change, but it needs to change for the better. And we need to see how we can wrestle that away from some of the parties in the top five. Obviously, still haven't got rid of this notion of unionism, because we haven't. In many ways, we believe that we have solved the constitutional question in a sense that if you come from a Catholic background, you won't be discriminated against. Or if you come from a Protestant working class background, you won't be discriminated against. Now, It depends on how we describe discrimination. So maybe you go for a job and you don't get a job, certainly, but that's changed, and because the politics and the legislation has been put in there now. But if you're sitting in a house that's damp, and the heat is leaking out of it, and the housing executive won't rehouse you, then the difficulty is that you're growing up in that background. And if you don't see those social problems that need to be changed, you need to be supporting parties who change it. And I think that some of that will definitely sink in, and people will start to realize, like, we need to be doing this. We need to be arguing for the things that we're entitled to. And the difficulty is unionists or working class loyalists, or whatever way we want to describe people, don't actually see that because they believe that the government will look after them, and the government hasn't looked after them and won't look after them. So it's from that point of view. And we need to recognise that people in my community or from the LGBT, people from my community have fetal abnormalities and need to have a choice of actually, sort of terminating it. And people in my community are suffering from educational underachievement. And therefore, all of those things need to be fixed. But people need to remember that all of those people are unionists and they all need those rights, and they're not getting them because the larger parties are not fighting those cases.
Absolutely. And I suppose just on time, we're going to leave it there. But thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Dermot, for inviting me on, and I really enjoyed it. I think that, you've got a good future in politics. So get to university and get your first class honours degree and then change politics in this country.
Thank you. To all of our listeners, thank you for listening. You can catch our blog and read any of our articles at www.youthvoiceni.com. You can catch us on Twitter at youthvoiceni or catch us on Instagram at youthvoice_ni. Once again, thank you all for listening. I was your host, Dermot Hamill, and we'll see you all next time.